Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon to those of you further east. My name is EJ Bryn, and I am the Senior Manager of Strategic Initiatives and Stakeholder Engagement at the BC Council for International Education. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to a conversation about intercultural and international education's current and future direction. This is the first webinar of our series on intercultural intersections in international education. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And it is my honor to invite Carleen Thomas, a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, to open our series with a formal welcome. Over to you, Carleen.
Thank you, EJ. OCM ni siaya ay tanishwalawan. Kwitsi kwitsnala ihui anta and sahalot at the mana santalia I siap mak sahotsiam and the imet kwethan sahalot kwetslahotsiam. I kwet halot I kwet swastemos tu. Hai tsepka meet sep kwetwilam I thomasquium I swahotmish I sauta tama. So what I said to you in the very teeny tiny bit of my language I know called Hunkameetnam or Downriver Hulkmeelam, I said, my respected ones, the feelings I have inside, or I feel really good to be with you here today. It actually means to see you, but you know, we're here in a virtual world and I can't see all of you, so I'm very honored to be with you here today. And in Coast Salish way, I introduced myself to you with my ancestral name. I carry the name Ansafalot. And in our way, we also share a little bit of our family. So, and we do that for a number of reasons, but the most important is that it informs you, the audience, that I know who I am. I know where I come from. And being a grandmother now, that responsibility, that shahalmas is so much more, it carries so much more responsibility. My name is Carleen Thomas. My parents are Ernie and Deanna George. My father is the current hereditary leader of our people. My grandparents are the late hereditary chief John L. George and the late Lillian or Dolly George, as she was known to her friends. And recently, I've been adding my maternal grandparents, and I've been doing this kind of work for a few decades now, and was trying to reflect on the reason why I wasn't including my maternal grandparents. And I come to the conclusion that we need our own reconciliation as well. The Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, the relationship that we had has been adversarial. Once we were put onto reserves and told, you're Musqueam, you're Squamish, you're Tsleil-Waututh, it kind of just set us against each other. So with the recent healing of that relationship, I am honored to introduce my maternal grandparents as the late Stan Joseph from the Squamish Nation and the late Caroline Nee Trimble Nee Joseph from Snuneymuxw, from Nanaimo, and Niska from the Nisga'a people. Then I raised my hands. Hi, Tsepka, meet Sepwikwilam. I'm thanking you and I'm welcoming you here to the homelands and waters of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I would just like to thank the organization, Terry Lynn, for reaching out to my nation to ask for this important protocol. This protocol would have happened back in the day on the beaches, and you would have had to state your purpose, why you're here, what your business is. And then we would have welcomed you to the shore and had a meal together. I'm really excited to learn that this kind of work is happening, this international education, and I look forward to learning more about this organization. And I wish you all the very best today in furthering your own education. Hi, Tsepka, thanking all of you. EJ?
Yes, thank you so much, Carleen. We're grateful for your warm welcome this morning. I also want to encourage all of you to take a moment to look around and acknowledge where you are and who came before you as well. Now I'm going to introduce our speakers for today's session. First, I would like to introduce Kyra Garson, who will be popping up on the screen shortly. Kyra Garson is our intercultural coordinator is the intercultural coordinator in the Faculty of Student Development at Thompson Rivers University. And we also have Todd Odgers, who is the moderator for the entirety of this series. He is the Associate Dean of International at BCIT. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So just a bit about the webinar series before we begin. This is the first webinar in our intercultural series that will run once a month through May, where we will discuss critical intercultural issues facing the international education field today. At our website, you can learn a bit more about the upcoming webinars, about the Foundations module, which I hope everyone has a chance to complete. And you can also learn about the certificate of completion that we're offering. So now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Todd to begin this session and ask Kyra to share her screen. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. This is, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much to Carlene from both Kyra and I for welcoming us this morning and getting us on a good start and a good footing. And I'd also like to thank BCCIE for having the vision to consider doing this series, because I think, well, Kyra and I, in conversation and other colleagues, we know that we're in a kind of a new era of internationalization and intercultural. And we're really excited about having Kyra kick off this session and this series, sort of setting the tone of where we're going. Okay, so everyone, what we've got, you can see up in the top right, there's a sequence code 60, 35, 18, and 3. If you could go to the Menti and then insert that code and answer this question. Well, we've got people started here. This is great. This will help us understand who we're talking with, and we'll try to situate the comments in the work that you're doing. And Kyra, I'll let you decide when you think you've got enough data there for you to frame your thinking on this today.
Okay. Well, we've had over 100 people answer, so I think we've got a good mix of participants, which is wonderful.
Yeah, this is really great.
Okay, great. So I'll go to the next slide, Todd, and you can get going.
Okay, let's go. In the Foundations module, we have a brief section of it talking about this work that Kyra and I did a few years ago. We presented this at BCCIE. We were reflecting on some phases that British Columbia had gone through, but also we were thinking about the field of international and how intercultural intersected with international. And that's the theme of this series of workshops. How does intercultural and international intersect? And when we think about this, you know, in phase one on the left, on the linking intercultural to internationalization, starting from that phase, in the 1990s, international student numbers on our campuses were quite modest. And there was a strong outbound focus, and a couple of authors that I really respected a lot at that time, Michael Page and Judith Martin, wrote about this potential for these international, especially outbound experiences, to be potentially transformative from an intercultural perspective. So there was the beginning of this idea of transformation, but it was primarily outbound. Later, in the next stage, in the early 2000s, intercultural started to be more intentionally built into faculty development, into curriculum. So we had internationalization of the curriculum, and there was a focus at that time on internationalization at home And what is the benefit to the domestic students on our campuses? And because we know that only a small proportion of students engage in mobility and go overseas. So we wanted to bring benefit to the domestic students and change some of our curriculum and teaching methodologies. Next, we recognize that from around 2010, something else was emerging, and we were seeing much higher levels of international students on campus, as well as consistently high levels of immigration. So we had large numbers of newcomer students in our classes as well. And there was more of a focus on inclusion and creating inclusive classroom experiences. How do we do group work? How do we do a variety of things that are more inclusive when students are domestic, but also maybe engaging globally? And there was a very beginning of this emergence of some critical intercultural theory in the field. Finally, after the TRC's calls to actions came out in 2015, really earlier than this, Kyra and I had a number of conversations about how little indigenization was having a place in the conversation. And then when the 2015 calls to action came out, really it started to take a much more central and really integral role to the work that we're doing. And I would say, we're starting to become more and more critical intercultural theorists, I would say, in this post-colonial view. And after giving that brief overview of where we are, and then having conversations with Kyra recently, we know, the field has changed, right, Kyra? And it's been a couple of years since we did this, and I would like today to be a bit of an update on what your thinking is and where you see the field, and where is intercultural practice for international educators? Where's that practice developing? What should we be looking at now as we move forward? This past summer, Black Lives Matter, and we have so many things going on right now. These are all COVID, it's all influencing us. Where are we going? Where do you see us going?
Yeah, well, a lot has changed, right? Not in the least a global pandemic, global climate crisis, global race relations, and really a reckoning with colonization, I think. And so it feels a little bit like we are at a crossroads, but there has been a lot happening, certainly since we developed that slide, and certainly since 2015. I think, it's interesting to me, even as early as January, the Journal of Studies in International Education put out a call for, excuse me, a special issue. And the special issue was about reimagining internationalization for society. And I thought, wow, this is interesting, because it's been over really a decade that we've been sort of talking about, and many people have been writing about how internationalization has potentially lost its way. Jane Knight said it lost its way. Hans de Witt and Uwe Brandenburg wrote over 10 years, almost 10 years ago, that right. It was the end of internationalization, right?
Right.
And so there's been, this sort of questioning about what's the direction, where are we headed? A lot of people really critiquing the commercialization of internationalization and sort of the framing of the neoliberal framing of many of the activities. And so I think, though, in fact, in Canada, we're really, like, a lot of these people are looking at internationalization writ large. I think in Canada, and especially in BC, we have a really slightly different context. It's a bit of an interesting case, because more so than even on this slide, I think that indigenization, decolonization, responding to the Truth and Reconciliation have really become a top priority in Canadian education. And so where does international and intercultural fit with that is a question that many of us have been asking and sort of pondering through the conferences that we've been hosting as well. But now we also have this sort of broader commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so I think we really need to be cognizant of how we align with these things, or where international intercultural might fit with these other national mandates.
Right, we are introducing so much diversity to the campus and external connections. So yeah, these mandates of indigenization and equity, diversity, inclusion are really important.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Oh yes, this is the adapted Knight definition. And what's really exciting about this, Knight's definition has been the standard in our field about what is internationalization, but there were some changes recently, right? Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what stood out for you and behind those changes in this definition?
Yeah, Knight's definition was around for a long time, and others went and sort of added to it. And according to Fiona Hunter, who was one of the authors of this new definition, they revised the definition because they wanted to address the why, right? Why are we doing internationalization, and also to sort of frame it as inclusive and intentional activities that would provide meaning and a meaningful contribution. And so, again, I think it's interesting. We're still kind of pondering what is that meaningful contribution exactly. And, with all of the changes and things that are going on in the world right now, I wonder if it's time for us to seriously consider, what is the meaningful contribution, and to go back to thinking about what are the principles, what are we trying to achieve. And so, maybe it's time to think about international, intercultural sort of contribution to the global common good, particularly when, is there a role for international education as a solution to some of these global crises that we're facing right now?
I really, if I can just say, I really like what you said there, the contribution to the common good as that being the meaningful contribution.
For sure. It's clear that the field of international is going to face challenges post-COVID. Certainly, there's lots of people talking about the degree of the challenges and what those will exactly be. I know Simon Marginson is making a lot of predictions about we have a 5-year recovery, and that really it's going to be a buyer's market. So some people are really thinking a lot about how to set up, the new recruitment and all of these things. But I wonder if our larger challenge is really addressing the why, right? And so I think this time right now really offers us some time to pause and think about how we might align more closely with our commitments to reconciliation and looking at equity, ethics, and social justice a little bit more broadly, given that these are the realities that our students are living in right now. You mentioned internationalization at home. There's been a lot of people writing about perhaps it's time to really refocus on the principles of internationalization at home for a variety of reasons, because it's maybe more inclusive of all students. But there's also people saying that perhaps it's more of an ethical response to climate change. I know Laura Rumbley's been writing about sort of the environmental impact of some of our activities in international education, and claiming that our carbon footprint is the size of some small countries. And so perhaps, now that we're grounded, there's another way to maybe reframe some of those things.
So this is really an opportunity to reframe and to reorient ourselves.
Yeah, and when we think really specifically more about intercultural and our approach as an intercultural, it's a few years ago now that Paul Gorski said, good intentions are not enough for intercultural educators. And I think now with what we're seeing going on in the world, I've got a quote here from him, and I think it's wonderful. He says, even when, well, he doesn't say this, but when intercultural learning, even when it's benign, right, and we have these good intentions, it allows us to, and this is what he says, go on celebrating diversity, while meanwhile we excuse ourselves from the messy work of social reconstruction. And so perhaps this is the time for us to kind of reframe, rethink what is the messy work of social reconstruction and what is the role of our field.
Okay, wow. I think there's another Menti slide we're going to follow up this with. Right, and this links very closely to what you've been talking about, Kyra, with regards to the current global crisis. And if everyone could go in there, that is the code. Yeah, there we go. If everybody can go in there.
Agree with me.
And the current global crisis. So how do we feel about this? Is it an opportunity, or do we need to primarily focus on recovery? Well, it looks like we're stacking up pretty much on the rethink side, Kyra.
It does, but you know, I mean, frankly, you know, in 2018, I think international education contributed close to $22 billion to the GDP. So
Yeah.
I think it's not an either or, maybe it's a way of just kind of thinking about the balance. And, you know, I was thinking about Outback and Knight's original rationales, and clearly the economic rationale is there. But, you know, they also proposed an academic rationale, a political rationale, and a social rationales. So how do we get back to thinking about balancing that, and the social, particularly at this time, I think is important.
Right, we do have to take care of our house and home, right? We do need to take care of our house and home and focus on a recovery, but we also need to think bigger and go out into the world in a new way.
For sure. All right, well, we got about 100 people that have gone on side with that. We got one more question for everyone. Let's see how your thoughts are.
This one, this is ranking. So what we're looking for is, you know, what should international and intercultural education should be doing? So should we align or respond to TRC, to equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, anti-racism movements, such as what we've been really experiencing a lot over the past few months, the crisis in climate that we're experiencing, as well as equitable COVID responses on a global level. Well,
it's a mix.
Yeah, but I believe in the foundation modules, we use the term urgencies, and it looks like there are a number of urgencies happening here, and people are generally seeing these as important. Yeah, we're tending towards high, moderate to strongly agree.
Great. All right. Go ahead, Todd.
So if you look, yeah, we'll transfer to the transition to the next one. Because what we want to do is, so this helps us to sort of set up the next phase. And a bit of a discussion, Kyra, this is going to set us up for what are some of the foundational or emerging theories and frameworks that you're reading, and also I know you're writing a lot right now. And you had you just had a year sabbatical, I believe, in South America, but so a little bit of a change of perspective, perhaps. What can help us going forward from these emerging or some new frameworks that we need to think about?
Yeah, well, I'm going to share a slide actually now that I've shared before. I'm going to try to share a slide that I've shared before. There we go. Yeah, I shared this at BCCIE, actually, the conference right before I left on sabbatical, and you know, my thinking around it has changed a little bit, but I think it's a nice, simple way to sort of frame this. You know, we've been doing intercultural in a variety of ways, and I think there's practices across the province that would capture maybe all of these. And the way that I presented it then was sort of this idea of post-positivist paradigm, a social constructivist paradigm, and a social critical. And I guess where I'm coming to after a year of really reading and studying is and recognizing that the critique of international and intercultural and global citizenship education has really become quite mainstream. There's an awful lot of people critiquing and asking some pretty poignant questions, which I think it would behoove us to sort of consider some of those points of view and ask some of those questions of ourselves and our work, and also the paradigms that are you know, informing the work we do. Of course, there's absolutely still a role for, you know, Hofstede and looking at the cultural dimensions and so on, but there's also some cons and some risks if that's the limited frameworks we're using. You know, social constructivism also plays a role. Many of us, you know, are looking at sort of the developmental processes involved in helping students to become more interculturally aware or interculturally sensitive. But
right.
increasingly,
I don't mean to cut you off totally, but that Bennett model being like more people now know the Intercultural Development Inventory, the IDI. So that's that similar way of thinking, right?
Of course, yeah, and of course it served us well, right? So I guess, you know, what my thinking is that maybe we need to sort of start looking a little bit more at some of these places, particularly when we're considering, you know, the global crises, the reckoning, as I'm calling it, with colonization, and also, you know, the global race issues that are happening right now. So there are some interesting, there's many people sort of critiquing all of these things. I wanted to share with you the work of Oana Nestian Sandhu. Sandhu, if I can. I'm sorry, I have to do it that way. It's not working on my. So what Sandhu has proposed is these principles of intercultural education. And I think, you know, some of them fit within the post-positivist and the developmental, and then we see sort of more of an inclusion of some of the critical pieces, really looking at combating discrimination and social justice.
Right. And can I just intersect there, Kyra? Sorry, I don't mean to keep cutting you off, but so Nestian Sandhu is not that well known in North America, even though I think she is North American, but she's worked a lot with in Europe and created a really influential framework. Is that right?
For sure. She's originally Romanian. And it's interesting because a lot of the critical internationalization literature is coming out of Canada, as well as the critical global citizenship. But the things that are framing intercultural more critically tend to be coming out of Europe, for sure. Nestian Sandhu's work, and also David Killick has created a framework for a critical intercultural practice. So it's a reflective model for intercultural educators, which is also quite interesting. So we haven't seen that much of this here, but yeah, absolutely. Nestian Sandhu's work's not actually even all that well known. And she hasn't written that much about it, but her work has really informed the Council of Europe's frameworks for democratic and intercultural education, and the indicators that the Council of Europe is now using. So they're trying to frame intercultural education, not just in terms of the more personal, but as a real social transformation model, where you know, they're looking at how intercultural works in plural and dynamic societies, and how the tensions that are involved in that need to also be a part of the framework that we use for intercultural. So you can see it's moving a little bit onto that critical edge, a little bit more so than what we've been tending to do. Also looking really at the multiple cultural identities in these pluralistic societies, and the nuances of intersectionality in that, sort of not just asking, looking at the potential for dissonance between some of those identity constructs that they're encountering with multicultural and pluralistic populations in Europe. So yeah, so it's just a little bit beyond maybe what we're doing. Another piece, I mentioned the critical internationalization, and there's a group of researchers, writers, and so on that have been, they are framed under this idea of decolonizing futures, sort of headed up by Vanessa Andreotti, but there's people working around the world doing different research projects on sort of what are the approaches and narratives and policies that internationalization is driven by, and sort of mapping them into this. They use a thing called social cartography to kind of map them and really push the edge of what are the principles that are driving this, and is there a way that we could be contributing something more through these activities. So Stein has done a, I'm just gonna, there we go.
Oh, there she is, right, yeah.
Yeah,
Andrea,
so Stein's Articulations, it's a fairly recent paper. It's quite a good read if you want to sort of have some starting points to questioning what we're up to. She actually has 4 articulations. The 4th one is called something really crazy. I'll tell you about it in a second. But really, so the idea is that, and this is a little bit like for the folks that have had a chance to go through the foundations model, modules, you'll remember that Todd had shown the Warner's model from way back when. And I think that it's influencing Stein a little bit here. So we see that in one of these articulations, it's really about the market and the competition, right? And, you know, rankings and that type of thing. The second articulation is really about the public good. So this sounds pretty good on the surface, but I think Stein also is very careful to warn us that this framing of internationalization as a global public good could have a tendency to be somewhat paternalistic, right? That somehow the North and the West are providing this superior education to this imagined global public in that way. So there's a bit of a tension there.
We're going to tell you how you need it and how it should be, right? Okay. So avoid that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third one, you know, she's moving to this sort of anti-oppressive internationalization, which, you know, divorces itself from that market model and really starts to question the benevolence of higher education, particularly with the north, south, east, west interface. The fourth one I didn't include here, it's called relational translocalism, and you'll have to read the article. It's pretty complex to try to unpack in a short time that we have with us today. So. It's interesting though, because Andreotti's group, that the Decolonizing Futures, they just published in the Canadian Journal of Higher Ed last year another paper where they are looking at internationalization through three different frames, not these three, but a liberal, a critical, and a decolonial, and they analyze student recruitment, student mobility, and internationalizing the curriculum through these frames, and look at the intersections of, you know, are we at an intersection of liberal critical, or are we at an intersection of decolonial liberal? And it's quite fascinating. But one of the things they do, and if I think I provided the citation for folks, but they at the end of these framing, their mapping onto these activities of internationalization, they had posed questions, and I found those questions really interesting, because they're not saying that liberal, critical, or decolonial are better. They're just kind of examining them and asking questions of them. So when they're thinking about the intercultural from the liberal frame, they would ask a question like, how can we prepare domestic staff and students to be more culturally sensitive towards incoming international students? So that's at the liberal sort of framework. At the critical, they would say, how can we address racism in all areas of the institution? Right. So it's moving a little bit different framework. And then at the decolonial level, they would ask a question like, does access to Canadian education for a specific subset of students around the world actually reproduce or even make uneven the global education landscape? So, you know, in all of these activities, they invite us to sort of reflect on, you know, through these different frames, reflect on our activities and who benefits from them.
This would be fascinating. That would be fascinating. I mean, in years past, when we used the Warner model with groups of faculty, the debate and discussion that happened from the contrast and blending of perspectives was really a powerful experience. But it'd be really interesting to sort of go through those questions with faculty and staff in a roundtable as well. I think really fascinating.
Yeah, it opens the door for some good dialogue and reflection about the direction we've come from and where we're headed, for sure.
Yeah.
I think we got another mentee here.
Yeah, we do.
There we go. So this one's a bit more specific to what we're doing right now.
So this is similar to the previous one. It's a ranking. So our intercultural programming at we would say at my institution, if you think about your institution, our intercultural programming intentionally includes a reference to UNDRIP, TRC, power and privilege, social justice framework, equity, literacy, and intersectionality. And a number of these, again, I just want to reinforce folks that in the foundations modules that you'll find on the website where you registered for this course, the foundation modules will focus on a number of these kinds of questions. And you know, if these are conversations that you don't normally have, or it's maybe some of it is new concept, or you want to dig into it, please go to the modules and you can investigate this further.
This is great. There's lots happening. This gives us a bit of an idea of what's happening, at least in the province, assuming most people are from BC on the call.
Yeah, and you
Yeah,
remember,
I think a good question. No, I don't. Whoops, sorry, go ahead, Todd.
I remember a number of years ago, was it 2011, you and I and Wayne Miles from Queen's University did that national survey, and we asked folks that were in senior roles how they were using intercultural programming. You remember that?
Yeah, and I remember there was a question about were they even using any frameworks to do intercultural learning, and it was a yes, no, and an I don't know, and I think there was about 60% that were no and I don't know. So we've really come a long way with sort of embedding intercultural learning into a lot of our activities, and maybe the next phase is embedding a little bit of these more critical sort of things to address what's happening in the world right now.
Okay, let's move on.
Awesome. I think you're going to ask me a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask you another question, wasn't I? So if I am not, a PhD student or a scholar or critical pedagogue, and I work in an international office, or I work in some aspects of international education or other areas, what can I take back today? Is there something, we should be thinking about?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping, as it's probably clear by now, that this morning will maybe get us to really start questioning, critically questioning asking about the why, right? Why are we doing this? How are we doing it? And who benefits? And I wanted to bring folks back to Jane Knight's original article where the first definition came from. And in that article, she also posed some questions for us and for the field. And this is 16 years ago now. And I think it's time to revisit it. She's asking, what are the expected benefits or outcomes, right? What are the values that are underpinning what we're doing? Are we having intercultural programming so that students can, be more competitive in the knowledge economy? That's a great goal, but is there maybe something more? What are we really after? And the question about who are the beneficiaries of our activities, I think, is really powerful. And then also the last one about, what are the unintended results? What are the negative implications? And we can look at that right across all the crises and sort of frame our question, in terms of the climate, in terms of race relations, in terms of the sort of colonial underpinnings that some people have critiqued around internationalization. So I think these are really valuable questions to revisit. And perhaps that means, revisiting them with our teams, having conversations in our offices about, dialing back. We have a plan. What is it? What is the meaning of what we're doing?
Yeah, aligning it with like our higher purpose, right?
Yeah, and I think right now, it's really about paying some close attention to what's happening with our students. Students are really living in a unprecedented, we keep hearing, time, but there's a lot of high tension around race relations on our campuses. There's a lot of anxiety about the future with many of our students in terms of climate, in terms of COVID, all of these things. So is there a way to come back to the students' needs and think about, what do they need in terms of intercultural skills, right? I think we need to revisit, rather than just the skills, we need to maybe think about going back to developing or concentrating on the development of the more effective outcomes of intercultural. We always talk about knowledge, skills, and attitudes. But maybe the attitudes are becoming really critical because the world is becoming polarized and quite divisive in many cases. So is it useful to come back to thinking about the effective aspects of the work that we do? And so I wanted also to cycle back to another old framework, which is
Stella. Yeah, Stella, can you hear me?
It's great, right? And so maybe some of these things are what we need now. So when we're thinking in terms of the the intercultural programming, are we just trying to get students' communication skills better, or are we able to build in some of these foundational pieces that Ting Toomey brought forward more than 20 years ago? And how do these kind of frameworks maybe serve us better in a time when we're dealing with racial tensions, when we're dealing with divisiveness in society, when, you know, we need to maybe think about what is the meaning when we go back to, you know, what is the meaningful contribution to society, and what are the attributes that we'd like students to leave our institutions with and go out into the world, right?
Right. You know, and I feel lucky. I studied with Stella Tingtubi, and actually that year in 1999. And I remember talking with other people in the field, and across the board, many people, Stella Tingtubi brought the idea of mindfulness. And in many ways, the mindfulness piece is also outlined here. Thanks for reminding us of this, Kyra, because I hadn't, you know, when you raised that you wanted to talk about this, I hadn't thought of this for some time. I think you're onto something.
Yeah. So in terms of, you know, what folks can take away, or what folks can maybe action, you know, I think there's a lot that we can do. I think we need to be seeking expertise in our institutions, building relationships with academic units that might have, you know, it's interesting because I think some people probably looked at that last Menti and went, oh gosh, I don't have, you know, experience with social justice work, or I'm nervous to incorporate things around power and privilege or race into my intercultural workshop. I don't have that expertise. I think now's the time that we reach out to some of the academic areas in our institutions and invite that expertise in. But at the same time, we can also balance expertise with lived experience, right? We have many people in our departments, in our institutions that bring that lived experience to this conversation. So that's possibly another.
Yeah, bringing more people into the conversation here.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of conversation, I think right now is about the time that we want to move to that second really interesting app that we're going to play with. So we're going to switch off of Menti, and we're going to go to something called Jamboard. And do we want to sort of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So commitment, we're calling this the commitment Jamboard because we're going to invite everyone to go to the Jamboard and make a commitment to something that you're going to go back and do action. It could be something very simple, like I'm going to read that paper, or I'm going to talk to my team, or it could be something more aspirational. It's totally up to you. The Jamboard is completely anonymous, so you can put something there. We do have a limit on the Jamboards of 50 people. So I think in the chat box, someone has kindly put split those into 4 Jamboards. So you'll be able to see the Jamboard you're participating in, but we will send out the results of all the Jamboards to inspire everyone post-session. So when you get to the Jamboard, it's going to look like this. And what you do is you just go to where the sticky is and you click on it, and you'll get a sticky, and you can write whatever you want on your sticky and leave it there. And we'll just let everybody come up with some action items for us as a collective.
So look in the chat. It's broken up by alphabetically by your last name, your family name, and if you could. Go to the group that the Jamboard you're a member of, and just click in. We'll come back here in a few minutes. We'll do this for a few minutes, and Kyra is going to collect them and then share them after the some of these ideas after the seminar is over.
Awesome. So there's a few coming up. Oh, we've got some people committing to setting up meetings with their EDI office. We've got collaborating with nonprofit organizations to support intercultural learning through global internships. Great. Read, Nesty, and Sandu. Okay, awesome. Let's see. Oh, there's a whole bunch here. I need to make it a bit bigger. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Love that. Ask myself the hard questions. Work on forming closer relationships with First Nations House of Learning. Fantastic. I'm going to do more reading on EDI. Develop or decide underlying frameworks to guide intercultural programming. Great. These are wonderful.
Yeah, one is like, bring this.
speakers.
bringing this back to their team. They want to bring this back to their team, and they're looking at what is the intersection of like TRC and BIPOC, and how that can maybe work within their initiatives that they're doing. Sorry, go for it, Kyra.
Yeah, work even closer with the Indigenous team, do more research, talk to more people, update my knowledge of the frameworks that I'm using, continue conversations with decision makers. We have a long way to go, but getting a dialogue started with my colleagues is where I'll begin, right? Awesome.
Yeah, bringing it back to their institutional D&I committee, and probably partnering with them.
Great.
Continuing to learn more in this area. So what we're going to do, I think some people look like they're having some fun with these. I love watching the way they're moving them around. It's really great. Recognizing the intersecting identities of my students, faculty, staff, with the intention of deconstructing some of the structures and creating more equitable outcomes for everybody involved. And someone's written in here, examine the why. So obviously what you said earlier, Kyra, something about the, when we were talking about the why of internationalization and how Knight's definition, etc., has really got us thinking. So we got, wow. That's the students what they need.
Oh, someone must have deleted some of the stickers on one of the boards accidentally, I'm sure.
Yeah, sometimes that happens by oops.
But the other boards are very full, so we'll be able to share those. So you can continue to put things in the commitment Jamboard even post session. We'll leave it open for a little bit, and then we'll gather them together and send them out to you for some inspiration later.
Right. So probably what we should probably be doing now is we'll come back. I think we're going to do a bit of Q&A. There are some good questions in the question box.
Maybe EJ can.
Yeah, maybe EJ can help us with that.
Yeah, let me scroll on up. We have lots and lots of questions that have been coming in. Let me start with, and feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask your question in person. I can unmute your mic if I can, if I see your hand risen, if you have risen your hand. So Kyra and Todd, I'm wondering if you can both speak a little about your positionality, non-racialized settler ? Just guessing, and how your work and how you position yourself in it has been impacted by who you are. What are the future directions for equitable and diverse voices in intercultural work? And yeah, I would just love to hear your thoughts on this.
Awesome. Do you want me to go first, Todd?
Sure.
Sure, it's an excellent question and something that I do think quite a bit about. Certainly, I am privileged in many ways. Yes, I'm a white heterosexual female with a good education, and you know, not from an underprivileged background. I think that has, in some ways, obviously served me well, but I'm also very conscious of that positionality in the work I do. I spend quite a bit of time in making sure that I have partners that represent other equity-seeking groups, often co-facilitators, but certainly not always. Currently, I'm co-editing a journal. All of the special issues that we've published have always been inclusive of, the editors have always been representative of equity-seeking groups, as well as we are very conscious of ensuring that we're raising the voices of Black, Indigenous people of color as authors, and also young and emerging scholars as well. So hopefully that kind of answers. Todd, do you have some other comment?
Wow. I mean,
It's a great question.
It's an awesome question, and all I can say is that one of the challenges of this work, being white, 55-year-old male from, settler background, and having worked in the field of intercultural relations essentially all of my North American career, and particularly now in this time, there's a lot of partnering that I'm needing to do and increase more, question sort of what my unconscious assumptions had been over, and the reasons and the rationales why I did this job, and I'm having some really excellent experiences and conversations with some of the folks, the people on my campus, as we are leaning into the post-George Floyd influence and what that means for us in Canada because of the really important issues related to the TRC and the calls to action. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. There are a number of other questions, and we can talk about this more. But can we?
Great.
One of the questions I see is, will there be citations, etc., available? And Kyra, you prepared something, right?
Yes, I did prepare a bibliography that'll be sent out from BCCIE.
Yep,
And
we
if
will
there's
send that.
something missing, just shoot me an email.
So now we have a hand raised. So Sean McClure, if you're there, I'm going to unmute your mic right now. And if you want to ask your question. Oh, it does not, maybe he's not there. It doesn't seem to be working. So you know what, while we work on that, I will ask the next question. So do you think the rise of Trump anti-immigrant sentiment and the overall divisive nature of politics in the US and around the world somehow suppresses the advance of interculturalization? Even the racism that Asians have felt in North America being blamed for COVID-19 reopens old wounds for folks that remember Chinese head tax and perhaps even Japanese internment.
Yeah.
I would say I'm interested in the term suppress. Possibly, it's very interesting times we're living in, but to me, it makes it even more important for us to really move to embed this, to embed intercultural, but to go beyond that post-positivist paradigm and to really think about what we can do in terms of aligning with social justice, with moving things forward within these various crises we're working with, and it's this notion of, well, some of you may have seen the BC campus webinar that we did on being and becoming an ally, and I keep thinking of my colleague Justin Wilson's comment about inviting everybody into his canoe, and that we all need to get in the canoe and we all need to start paddling.
We all need to start paddling,
time, right?
Yeah, great line. That's a great metaphor. Hey, Kyra, we're running close to the end of the time here.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
Obviously there will be more questions popping in, and I just want to say, EJ, thanks so much for being an awesome organizer of this today, and for BCCIE putting this together, and Kyra for engaging us in this conversation.
Yeah, and I just want to thank both of you so much for your time. That was really engaging. I really enjoyed the Jamboard and really the interaction that was throughout your presentation and the conversations. And I feel like I'm going to walk away with a lot of things to think about. And we will share these Jamboards. And there were a lot of really fantastic ideas. So I'm sure I will be borrowing some of those ideas to use in my own work as well. So just to follow up, we will be sending the Jamboard out. We also will be sending out the list of citations, as Kyra mentioned. And Tara Lynn has put the link to our Intercultural Dialogue series, the entire series, if you want to check out the modules, if you haven't already. And then we look forward to seeing everyone next month on October 27th for another engaging conversation. So have a great day, everyone. And thank you again, Todd and Kyra, for the presentations.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyra. Thanks, EJ.
Thanks, you guys.